Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's video and our ongoing exploration of the story by Randy Frazee. This time around we are looking at chapter 24, which is entitled No Ordinary Man. This particular chapter features portions of all four Gospels. Most of what we are reading throughout the first part of the chapter is kind of a mixture of the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, pulling various stories, various aspects from them. But we end the chapter with a portion from John's Gospel, specifically the explanation and teaching moment that goes on and follows the feeding of the 5,000. That's actually a very large section of John. And if memory serves me correctly, we have like a 5-week window later this summer when the lectionary has us in that continuous ongoing teaching from John, which is known as the Bread of Life discourse, but that's just kind of a side note. Most of what we have, though, is aspects of Jesus' ministry from the other three Gospels. Now, the focal point of this chapter is really zeroing in on that active sort of central ministry of Jesus. We might consider this kind of the central portion of the story, or the central portion of his ongoing ministry. Now, there's kind of some sections if you sort of pay attention to the various stories within the Gospels, and what we also see throughout the course of the church year, if we think kind of liturgically and some of our different seasons. We're sort of between the initial introductory period of this is Jesus and he's being revealed to the world, aka the stuff that we have during the season of Epiphany, which is back in January and goes into the early part of February, and sometimes a little longer depending on the year. The last couple of chapters that we focused in on have really kind of had that focus of ways that Jesus is being introduced out into the world. From the flip side of that, after the tail end of the ministry portion is when Jesus' face is turned towards Jerusalem. Sometimes it is called the travel narrative, as he's slowly making his way towards Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover and the events that we know as Holy Week. We could give that a Lent focus, which of course is where we are in the liturgical calendar, the church year right now as we are recording this. And that is really what we kind of will find in as a focal point in the next chapter. So next week, that will come up. So many of the stories that we have featured here in the chapter this week could be found, or they might be featured as the gospel readings during the season of Pentecost, which is the long season that really kicks in usually early summer. Sometimes we might hit it towards the end of May, but a lot of times it's into June. And kind of runs through usually into November by the time that season wraps up. And it's really kind of the meat and potatoes of Jesus' ministry, if we want to put it that way. Within the chapter and the narrative that we have today, within his active ministry, we see Jesus wearing a lot of hats with some different focal points, but really the main two, sort of what he focuses in on during his active ministry boils down to one of two things. Either he's teaching or he's showing himself to be a miracle worker. Namely, he's either in rabbi mode, sometimes for his immediate disciples, sometimes for individuals, sometimes for great big huge crowds. So that's the rabbi teaching mode. And then the other one is the divine man who is also God, who is also man. And yeah, that's weird, aka miracle worker, when he's doing the miraculous moments, miraculous healings, miraculous situations that we see throughout the various stories. Thinking about the teaching moments, the teaching mode initially. We have direct teaching, where he's literally sitting and teaching. And we have Sermon on the Mount, which is featured within our chapter today. And then another big time teaching tool that Jesus is very well known for, and perhaps you've heard me talk about this before, sometimes I like it, and sometimes I don't, is the parables of Jesus. He speaks in parables a lot. Parables are moments when Jesus takes some divine concept, like the kingdom of heaven, and compares it with something that is well known and common that people would begin to understand. Now, here's the thing about parables. It's always important to point these out. Jesus is taking these things that are up here, that are above our ability to comprehend, and comparing them to something we understand. So the kingdom of heaven is like this. It's not saying that the kingdom of heaven is a mustard seed, but it's like it. It's like this little tiny seed that grows up into a great big plant. And what do we make of that? Well, parable interpretation is always fun, but that's the point of parables. It's trying to take something that we can't understand and compare it to something that we sort of do understand. Within the miracles, that's kind of the other aspect of this, there's a wide range of recipients. And that's something that I always think is important to remember when we pay attention to who is on the receiving end of these miracles of Jesus. Sometimes it's one person or a couple of people. Sometimes it's related to a family that receives it. Sometimes it's giant crowds that receive it, like think the feeding of the 5,000 or the feeding of the 4,000, which is another miracle. It's not actually in this chapter, but that's also in there. Those are some really big crowds. Sometimes the recipients are Jewish. Sometimes they're Gentiles. There seems to be a wide range of who Jesus intends to receive these miraculous moments. And I think that's good for us to remember. One other aspect that's present within this chapter that always sort of makes me chuckle, that's worth mentioning, is the death of John the Baptist. It almost seems like a gospel side note. The various gospels feature this with slightly different details, but it usually seems to almost be Herod Antipas having a side note thought when he hears about Jesus and can't quite figure out what to think about who this guy is that he's hearing about, and he thinks it's John the Baptist. So it's almost like, oh, remember that guy that I used to like, but that I ended up having beheaded. And I always think that's kind of weird the way that is presented, but that seems to be the way that the death of John the Baptist is featured. As we wrap things up, again, like the habit we've sort of been in, I'm not going to break down the narrative real closely beyond what I've already talked about, but I do want to wrap things up as we think about this chapter with some things that make me go, And the main one that pops up this time around, it's something that really I do ponder on and I don't have a good answer for. I don't really have great thoughts about, but it's something that scholars call the messianic secret. And now that's a big fancy word that basically talks about Jesus not wanting the recipients of his teachings or his miracles to tell anybody about it. And I've always wondered, why is that? Like, for instance, when he cast legion out of the demoniac that's around the region of Gennesaret, and the demons all go into the pigs and the pigs all drown. Well, he talks to the guy and he says, don't tell anybody what happened. And what does the guy do? He goes off and he tells everybody what has happened. And I've never really understood the reasoning why Jesus wants to be so secretive about this. Now, this is really present in Mark's gospel, perhaps more heavily than in the other gospels. It's present in the other gospels as well. But Mark really hammers on this point that Jesus seems to want to keep things on the down low until after the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And I always wondered why, and I don't have a good answer to it. Why does it need to wait for his resurrection to happen before people are supposed to talk about it? Does the resurrection make some of this stuff make some more sense? I don't know, maybe, but to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I always wonder, how does it seem to work when Jesus tells people, hey, don't tell anyone about this? It seems like they go off and they tell everybody about it. So maybe he's using some reverse psychology on them. Maybe not. I don't know. But makes me go, I don't have a great answer, but it is something that I wonder about. That's everything I have. Hope you have a great discussion. We'll catch you next time.